Hi, and welcome to another episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That's Robert Hilliard. I'm Whitney Wiley, and we want to thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about the Great Resignation, um, sort of what's driving it, and more importantly, what you can do about it. So, whether you are leading a department, leading a whole organization, there are things that you can do. And I just want to say this at the outset. Some of the things I've been reading, increased salaries, and no one's going to ever throw your money back at you, but throwing money at the problem is not the solution.
Right, right.
So, Robert, what are you thinking about this?
Wow. Yeah, this is one of those things where you start to read about it and you see everybody's different ideas and opinions about how to solve it. So I thought it was very interesting. Really curious to hear your thoughts a little bit. But I read a lot of articles about this, and I took three out of the bunch that I read and said, I'm going to, talk about the three different approaches to dealing with it. One of them took a more data-driven approach. The other took a more, well, we know the issue is life balance, so flexibility approach. The other one was more like, okay, because of the things that have happened in the past year, many employees and organizations feel that their careers have stalled. So three different reasons and approaches to dealing with the Great Resignation.
So, I'm going to say this. I think it all boils down to one thing. Regardless of what the different ways this has manifested itself, it ultimately boils down to one thing. There's a values mismatch, right? Employees are looking for something, employers are looking for something, and at the moment, they're not matching up.
Right.
And depending on where you are in your career, depending on what it is you're doing, employees at the moment, the workforce at the moment, is going to sort of generalize this. It doesn't apply to every employee in every sector at every level, but overall, I would say that employees have leverage right right? And so they are flexing that muscle. That's what this is. They are flexing that muscle. And seeing this is that, and I've read a lot of different articles as well. The way I'm seeing this is sort of an approach that I have been pushing for some time, which is going back to values. Employees, people who are in the workforce, or even if you have a business, you have to start with an understanding of and have a vision for your life, right? And then work is one of the things that is a part of that. And so, right now, what is happening is, after having this pivot last year of people, I think for a long time, saying, we want more flexibility in the workplace. Give us flexibility. Can we telecommute? Can we
Right.
work from home? Can we work remotely? Can we work this out? And employers pushing back, sort of saying no. Some of it legislatively driven. We've talked about that before,
Sure.
but a lot of it is mindset from just an old framework that has been used and passed down about how to manage the workforce. So you got these values mismatches where employees are saying, oh, so I can work remotely and be productive and our company make money. Oh, I can take care of my family in a way that that I can manage a little more easily than showing up, from 9 to 5. Oh, I can, right? All these
Right.
different things that they have found out that they can do. And employers letting that happen out of necessity And now they're like, well, we don't need to do it that way anymore. So let's go back. And this is not a conversation about return to office. We've talked about that the last couple of weeks. You can go back and look at
Yep.
the prior episodes and hear some of our conversation about that. But okay. I want to do this. You are not allowing me to do this. I'm going to flex my muscle and I'm going to go and find something that works better for me. And the ultimately the bottom line is that we'll have to come to a place where it's symbiotic for both sides, right?
Right.
To get to a place of equilibrium. Right now, employees are just flexing that muscle. In the
Right.
past, employers had been flexing that muscle and sort of saying, this is the way it is. If you want a job, you do it our way or go on about your business.
Yeah, I tend to agree that a lot of it has to do with values. That when values are mismatched, that always creates problems. I remember this is kind of funny. I remember one time explaining to a former boss. You're already smiling because you know I'm going to say something wild and wacky. Explaining to a former boss about enjoying my job and him getting upset with me. He goes, "You're not supposed to enjoy your job. That's why they call it work." So that was a values mismatch. Needless to say, we didn't really get on too well, right? So, but yeah, I think it has a lot to do with some of what's driving this. Uh, Oddly enough, one of the approaches that I'm a very analytical person. One of the approaches that one of the articles that I read said that employers should take is to be more data driven. So look at, because every organization is different and they have
Right.
different, things exerting pressure on them based on the industry they're in and the environment. But they said they should take a more data driven approach. So they should do some research and find out what's driving their turnover, and also um, look at turnover and compare it to previous years. Okay. And then after that, look for the root causes. Is it things like compensation? Is it time between promotions? Does it take so long in your organization to move up that people are getting frustrated and they're leaving? The size of the pay increases, training opportunities, and things like that. And then they were saying, based on that data, you take a tailored approach to creating your retention program. And I kind of like that one. You know that I'm big on analyzing things and looking. I like that. But always, I always say this: you always have to look. This is a very complex time, and when you're dealing with complexity, you can't just say we're going to do it this way. And you have to be able to move things around and look at what's working and what's not working and adjust. And so that was one approach, and there were several other approaches that we'll get to. Um,
And I love that, and I absolutely wholeheartedly agree. I don't think you should look into the marketplace and say, "Oh, this is what's happening." Right? There's this great resignation, and people are leaving their jobs, and thus and so. So we need to do some blanket something. You need to understand what's happening in your organization, right?
right.
And then you need to come up with a plan to address what's happening in your organization, which is why I say it's a values mismatch. And it's not that it's necessarily any one thing, other than we're not seeing this eye to eye for whatever reason, right? And maybe in your organization, maybe it is money.
Mhm.
Maybe you're grossly underpaying the market and they're saying we're leaving. In some other organization, it could be because your leadership is not solid. It is not serving your employees. In some other organization, it could be any number of things. And so taking the time to get that information, and you as a data dude, yes, I agree. It's important. I have this question for you, because I know how difficult it is to sort of get that information, particularly out of the tool that's traditionally used, the exit interview.
I used to do exit interviews. Yeah, you have to, So I'll let you finish your statement first.
I think it speaks for itself. You're trying to get that information from an exit interview, and my observation, study, research, and personal experiences is that the information you claim you are wanting is not necessarily forthcoming because of the way you've treated exit interviews in the past, and people don't tend to trust them and are not um, necessarily being forthright with the information for lots of reasons. Not least among them is not wanting to burn bridges, right?
Right, you don't want to burn bridges, right? Yeah.
And so you have to be careful because you may not get the information that you're seeking. And so on the other side of that, maybe the thing that you can look at would be a retention interview or a retention study to understand why the people who are staying, why they're staying. And in between the two, you may be able to get the information and the data that you're looking for. So Veronica says, isn't the purpose of the exit interview to gain insight on potential litigation? That's one of them. It depends on the company and the reason that they use it. Supposedly, it's to help improve. It's to help, right? It's to understand why people are leaving so that you can improve the environment, the culture. Correct. That you have. And as a lawyer, I will not dispute that the information that they gather is used to understand any potential litigation.
Correct. I mean, the way it was always framed to me was we're looking, it's kind of like that last climate type survey you're doing with that person that's leaving the organization to find out why they're leaving the organization. And you're right, a lot of times there are some people that have no problem saying why they're leaving the organization. They're not just burning the bridge, but they're blowing it up. They have no problem with that. But some employees are very reluctant to really speak their mind in exit interviews. They're like, everything is great. And, I think that you should be gathering data along the entire life cycle of someone's employment in the organization. And I think that if you're just relying on exit interviews, you may find that you're on the back foot a little bit. So there's other tools that you can use to gather information. I think that organizations sometimes miss an opportunity to get that information before something happens.
Yeah. So how would, you talked about throughout the entire life cycle, but at this point, we are where we are. Yep. I don't have an opportunity to get it from the life cycle of these droves of people leaving.
Right.
So how do I get this information? What kinds of things should I be asking in order to maybe get the best answers possible that will serve us for those who remain and those we ultimately will be replacing those who are leaving with?
That is a real tricky question because once someone leaves the organization, I don't think they're likely to come back and go, hey, I left because of this, yeah. Right? So I think that you need to look at all sources of data that you can get your hands on. You can look at what's going on in your industry, getting some information from that standpoint. Look at what you can learn from your exit interviews in your organization. Look at all sources of data and try to really get a very clear picture of what's going on in your, how it's affecting your organization. It can be really difficult. And I think a lot of times what was happening in some of the organizations that I worked in is they weren't using that data for anything. It just became, we're collecting this information to collect this information, and they weren't doing anything with the data. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the huge issues with people wanting to be forthright with those, right? They don't believe anything is going to happen.
Right. So if you're showing people that you're actually using that data, they will be more, I think, more inclined to be, open with you when they finally are, leaving the organization. So I think that was, a lot of times, I would, hear people say, well, what are you going to do with that data? We know nothing's going to happen with this data. And that was when I was doing them, and I would pass that information on to my boss. And my boss was like, well, we're just kind of collecting the information to collect it. And I was like, oh, okay. But, we should be doing it for a purpose. Other than that, it's just busy work.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's say you get the information and you get to a root cause, then what?
Well, then they were saying you develop you develop a retention program based on the information you get. So you look at that specific information. And what I like about it, you're not looking at this and going, oh, people are leaving because, and you're just taking the headlines of what people are saying. You're looking at what's specifically happening in your organization, and you're building your program around that. And so it's not just the flavor of the month. It happens to be what's actually going on in your organization. Yeah. And I like that approach.
Some of what I have read is that it's happening a lot mid-career.
Yes.
And so with these mid-careers, so probably last year may have been a purging of entry level, right? So as you are doing a reduction in force, often you've got this, speaking of another values mismatch, you've got this wanting to reduce cost, which is one of the reasons reduction in forces happen. You're trying to reduce costs so that generally the people who make the most are those with the least amount of experience, right? But if you find yourself in a place where you need to have people with more experience, you're talking people who are mid-career and beyond. And so the group that is now sort of leaving, they were held onto, I'm making suppositions here. They were held on to last year when there were some reductions in force that happened, right? Because we need to hold on to people who can actually do
right.
the job and do the job without being supervised on a regular basis or almost minute by minute basis or whatever. And so you're keeping those people. And now those people are saying, yeah, I've done this now for 18 months. I'm not really feeling this. I can take my show on the road, so to speak.
Well, and they may be feeling burnt out as well, because if you let people go and you're retaining those folks, they're probably doing more than they've been doing before, and which is really interesting, because that was another lens that somebody looked at this through. They were looking at people who felt their careers had stalled. They felt professionally stuck. And they said that, what organizations can do with this, and I have some notes here that I'm because there was so much data, I had to write stuff down for a change. But they were saying that really look at how employees can grow within the organization, to really look at what they want to learn in their organization, the skills they want to pick up, allow those people to either move up or move laterally. That was really important. Track progress, see what's working, what's not working, where you're going to make those changes. That was really important. And that growing laterally or moving laterally in organizations, that popped up a couple of different times in some of the articles that I was reading.
And so I would say, this isn't a pandemic result, right? We're seeing it in the numbers that we're seeing it and giving it a title because of sort of this movement from where we were to where we are. And so we can give it a name. But that is in reality really the number one, number two, it's the top reasons that people leave companies in the first place, right? Leadership, and then the inability to continue growing in their work. So it's like leadership, appreciation, and acknowledgement. And then you've got the ability to grow, somewhere to go to. And I have come up with, I call it the three-legged stool of employee development, is that you've got to have a plan for your employees, pandemic or not. If you are interested in retaining your employees, you got to have a retention plan.
Right.
Right. And I am a big believer that everything starts with your organization's strategic plan. You have a strategic plan. You've got to have in your each department or unit that has employees, you've got to have a hiring plan. That department needs its own strategic plan that ties back to the organizational strategic plan. You've got to have a hiring plan that feeds into the strategic plan. And then you've got to have employee development plans, right, for your employees, so that you can make sure that you are developing and bringing your employees along for the organization as well as their own career growth and opportunity. And without that, they are going to leave. You can pay them really well, but they'll take a job that is similar in pay or even maybe a little bit below if they see somewhere else that they can get the intangible things. We talked about this with the Hertzberg hygiene factors, right?
Yeah.
They will go somewhere else to get those things that reduce their dissatisfaction with the job, even if they have some satisfying factors like pay and doing work that they actually enjoy. They will go somewhere else for those other reasons.
Yeah, that happens. It's very interesting. You say, strategic plans and things like that. A lot of organizations are kind of redoing what they think about strategic plans because they've tried them so many times that it just did not work, because they weren't really prepared for the external forces that were exerting the pressure on the strategic plan, and they were just, we're going to do this, and this, and it didn't have a way to navigate those changes.
But isn't that supposed to be part of the strategy?
Yes, it is.
To be able to be flexible and
Yes,
nimble
it is.
and have thought through challenges. That's why you do a SWOT analysis and other things, right? But
Yeah.
that's just me. What do I?
Yeah. And a lot of folks, they don't get that. It's like, oh, we have these things here. We have these core values, this mission statement, this vision statement. Let's go and do it. But that's a discussion for another time. But yeah, so it's very interesting because the last approach and the last way of last lens of looking at the Great Resignation was through the lens of flexibility. And they were saying that, the reason why in this particular article's, opinion, the person that wrote this article, this author's opinion, was that most people are leaving because of job flexibility and burnout. So one of the things is, they got a taste of what work-life balance could be like last year, and they want more of it. So what this author said was, you want to extend remote options for employees and then train managers. So you're going to have some employees that are working remotely, some are working at the location, some are working hybrid, and you want to train managers in how to lead them. So they're not favoring one type of employee over another, so that there's some equity there. And then it said, really look at well-being and attack well-being head on. Take employees seriously when they talk about being burnt out, when they talk about their workload being too much for them. Look into that. Just don't poo-poo them, hear what they have to say and really attack that issue head on. The other thing that we're saying was encourage employees, again, let them have options in the organization. Do they want to move up? Give them the tools that are going to allow them to do that. Do they want to move laterally? Give them the tools that are going to help them do that. It's better to, it was funny because one of the articles said, no manager owns an employee. Right? So it's okay if that employee moves to another department in that organization. I see you trying to, stifle a laugh there.
No, that was legitimately a cough.
Okay, I was just checking. But but we've seen that. We've seen in our careers, managers that want to hold on to employees, and they don't want that employee to go to even a different department. But sometimes that's the best way to keep that talent and that knowledge inside the organization.
Yeah.
And then they said, and I thought this was interesting, they said that establish pay equity and transparency. So look at any gaps in pay and communicate what they're seeing to employees and then fix them. So I thought that was very interesting. So they looked at it from several different lenses, but the primary way they were looking at it was flexibility.
No, I think that, as we mentioned, or as I mentioned, as part of sort of that discussion about strategic plan, anytime you are um, uh, stuck and determined to do things just one way, or the way that you've planned, right? And yes, a plan suggests that's what you're going to do, but any plan, you've got to have flexibility and how you get there, and making decisions on the fly. That's what management and leadership is about, is being adaptable and flexible and looking at the external factors that are coming into play and then making adjustment. That's what we did last year, right? That's what the whole of 2020 was. And the word of the year, pivot. It was about being flexible. It was about being adaptable, looking at the reality. No one was planning for that. Everyone was planning for something else. And then you make some adjustments. But as you made those adjustments, there were still things within your plan, whether it was a strategic plan or any other kind of a plan. There were still things in there that you wanted to do, needed to do,
Absolutely.
and you just had to find a different way to do it. And as long as you are willing to do that for your organization as a whole, why would you not extend that to your employees? You want that from them, right?
Right.
When something changes in the organization, you want that for them. You have to be willing to give that then to them.
You brought up some really good points. I think one of the interesting things that happened last year, and we talked about this, there were some organizations that just we were kind of shaking our heads going, do they not, are they denying what's going on? It was kind of weird, right? So you had some organizations that were really quick to pivot. They're like, okay, what about this? Let's try this out. Let's move in this direction. And you had other organizations that are just like, no, I don't. It's like I don't see it. It's like when you're watching one of those horror movies and someone covers their eyes, like that's not going to make the bad guy go away.
Right.
He's still in the room. But it was just really interesting. And finally, those organizations were like, okay, now we have to do something, because it wasn't one of those things that was over really quickly. It still isn't, right?
It still isn't, right?
Right.
Which I think reinforces the whole point of flexibility and adaptability, is that
Absolutely.
you're going to continue to do this, and the really interesting thing is you've always been doing that, right? In some form or fashion, although some companies haven't, and they have gone the way of the dodo bird, right? So we don't buy
Video
Fords anymore.
or
I
video.
wanted to pick something way back.
Oh, okay. Wait. You mean VCRs aren't way back enough?
Or VCRs,
Betamax. Betamax.
I still have one, so
No, you don't.
I am dating myself. Or Walkman, right?
Oh,
I
wow.
mean, there's an evolution, and companies that continue will embrace that as part of it. It's change. It's
Yeah.
change management, and it is part of the package. And so you have to apply that same thing when it comes to your employees, and being willing to be flexible with them, allowing them to be flexible, will go a long way towards helping you to retain them. And we're operating under the assumption that that's what you want,
Yeah.
right? As a leader of an organization, that's actually what you want. And so if it is that aspect of the retention efforts are really important.
Yeah, and now I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate of going the other side. We're assuming, and we're not assuming because we know it's not easy. We know each other well. We know that being a leader is difficult work. I would love to hear what some organizational leaders say about this. How they're looking at things, and how they perceive what's going on in the environment outside, and whether or not they thought they were moving in a timely manner. I'd love to hear. I should reach out to a few that I know and just kind of pick their brains a little bit.
Yeah. And I have clients who I think did a marvelous job. I'm not going to toot my own horn, but I'd like to think I had something to do with it. But they did a marvelous job of making the adjustments in situations where you would have thought that's really not going to happen, right? And some industries where the delivery of the service or the product was necessarily face to face have found a way to actually do it virtually. And so there's always a way if you're willing to get creative, if you're willing to ask the questions, if you're willing to be a learning organization, and we've talked about this before as well, if you're willing to be a learning organization and take some chances, take some risks, and be okay if you try something and it doesn't work, to try something else again. There are a lot of companies that when they said you're shutting down, they shut down for good out the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Out the gate. How do you just quit? It hasn't even been 2 weeks and you're already like, well, we're shutting down our doors. We're done.
There was some organizations that they just gave up. Yeah.
And so and others that did something, they tried something, maybe it didn't work, maybe it sort of worked, they learned from that, they made another adjustment, and then now they're still here and they're thriving. And that's not to say that every company that's still going on is thriving. There are lots of companies that are struggling, but they didn't quit out the gate, right? You at least tried some, you gave yourself an opportunity to continue. And now maybe you're faced with new choices or you're faced with having to shutter. And there's nothing, there's nothing I think to be ashamed of.
No, not at all.
Right. It's part of what happens in business, always has from the beginning. And you will come up with something new or you'll move on to something else. It is just the evolution of business.
Yeah, Dave Snowden calls those safe to fail experiments. So you pick a direction, you try something, you make adjustments, try something else, you make it, and when you're dealing with complexity like we are, that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And some organizations just couldn't. I'm done. They just tapped out right away. And others are still, some are thriving, and some others are still finding their way.
Absolutely. Travel is one of those areas, right? That's still trying to find its way. And it's going to take time because people have to feel comfortable, right? It's not just about the company or the industry. It's also about people's comfort levels of getting back to being around people or, traveling, being in planes and things like that. Staying in hotels or whatever it is. I want to be staying in a hotel next week. I've stayed in a couple over the course of the pandemic. And what I found was that there were services that were no longer being offered.
Right.
Were some things, but there were other things that they had stepped up. And cleanliness which I truly appreciated a hotel, had increased, right? And so you go and they clean the room and they seal it, saying nobody's been in there. And you go in and actually it looks like it's cleaner than it was the last time you were there. So
Yeah,
there are things that have happened. And some
absolutely.
of this is, again, is not even about the management or the leadership of an organization. It has to do with your customers and their comfort level, and coming back and actually traveling or having the resources to do that. And business travel is probably going to be one of those things that's going to lag a little bit as people continue to do events virtually,
Yeah,
right? As people are working remotely and they don't need to travel to be with people, right? Where you would have gone to a meeting at your headquarters, it's now a virtual meeting. So I don't need to make those travels. So I imagine business travel is going to be one of those things that's going to continue to sort of lag behind,
right.
and maybe personal travel will lead the way a little bit on that as people are sort of stir crazy, cabin fever, and they're
Right.
looking to get away. Although I know a lot of people are doing that travel by car, um,
Okay.
and then staying in Airbnbs and other things. So but it's about flexibility and adaptability, and then maybe exploring and looking and seeing what other people are doing,
Yeah.
right? And then bringing those best practices back to your organization.
Right. And I love the fact you said looking and seeing and bringing it in, seeing if you could use it. If not, discard it. Try something else. I think it's very good to do that. You don't want to be boxed or backed into a corner. I saw that even Tony Robbins is now having a virtual thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've attended a couple of those.
yeah,
Awesome. It was awesome. Just
yeah.
want
I mean,
to just want to say, and they are actually going back to in person, I believe, next month, or
okay.
at least a hybrid thing. So again, the bottom line is, I want to wrap up the things that you said was um, quantifying the problem, right? Doing some gathering the data, understanding how bad the situation is in your organization. So, yes, you can read what's happening out in the world, but you want to look at what's actually happening inside of your organization. So, gather the data, identify the root cause of what's happening, right? Why are people leaving your organization? If you can get that information, right? Hopefully, you can get that information from people before they've actually left. You can, I would say, still ask. They may not answer you if they're already gone, but there's no harm in asking,
And you could
right?
also talk to their manager too. Their manager will probably have an idea.
Exactly. Our coworkers they
Mhm.
may not say specifically for XYZ person, but they know. They know what's happening in
Mhm.
your organization. And to that point, I would say do not chastise them, do not get defensive about the information. It's feedback. It's nothing but feedback. Look at it that way and just hear what people have to say, and then put together a retention plan. Pay real close attention to your retention efforts in general. You should be doing that right now anyway, whether anyone has left your organization or ever leaves your organization, right? Which they are,
Yeah,
So we're not going to pretend like no one's never left.
right.
But you should be paying attention to that. And I would say paying close attention to your employee development program, your employee development plans. Every employee should have a plan for development. It's not necessary that you're going to invest exactly the same amount in your CEO as in your frontline workers. Although I think your CEO is, got resources. Other people don't. So you need to pay attention to it. You need to be flexible there as well.
Sure.
And then and make sure that includes training, right? So they know how to do their job, mentoring, coaching, all of those things to help them to grow for their personal growth, because they're going to bring themselves, their whole selves to work every day. All right. And I think a lot of employers will say, well, we're not interested in that. If it's not directly related to the job, we're not going to do it. I would suggest that's not the best approach. Yeah, maybe you don't need to invest in someone learning to be a baker, but maybe, right? A happy baker, free treats for all your events.
Or at least to find opportunities for them to express that side of themselves while they're working their job. I mean, there are events and things like that. But I think that's really important. It's so funny because I used to do a training class, and one of the things I used to say is, people bring their whole selves to work. They may only feel comfortable expressing one part of themselves, but trust me, their whole self is there. And it will
come. You might as well help them be the best whole selves they can be, right?
It's going to come out sooner or later.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you, Robert, for this enlightening discussion. I hope you got something out of the conversation. If you are watching this live or in replay, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. If there's anything we can do to help you in your organization, please reach out. And if you've got a topic that you would like for us to cover, you can let us know that as well. You can leave it in the comments. You can send a DM or you can send an email. So we want to thank you. We are here every Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care.
Bye-bye.